Hey there, I'm a relationship therapist here in Maryland, and these are my reactions to the new Lily Allen record, West End Girl. Super quick disclaimer, I'm going to be listening to this, giving my reactions, sharing my insights as a couples therapist, but this is, of course, no substitute for therapy. I also anticipate that I'll probably be moved to kind of take a side here. There are, of course, exceptions, but typically the couples therapist doesn't really take a side. So musically, in this track, there's kind of this like hopeful rising action in the chord progression, and lyrically, you've got this tension between the like budding, burgeoning feeling of this relationship and the sense that things are moving too fast and at a pace that she's not comfortable with, and sort of progressing without her buy-in. And then she gets this phone call from her husband. We notice that her mood kind of shifts, and then we see these tiny windows where she's expressing, it makes me kind of sad, it doesn't make me feel great, but they're always like kind of sandwiched with, yes, okay, sure, I just want you to be happy. This sounds like a situation where there's a shift in the relationship agreement, but not everyone is totally on board. So I'm concerned. I also have concerns about the point where she says, well, if that's what you need to do. Here I'm guessing that we're talking about opening the relationship up or retooling the relationship agreement such that at least he can hook up with other people. And when I hear Lily on her end say, if that's what you need to do, I have concerns about the idea that this is an absolute need. And I have concerns about the sense that her husband seems to sort of require her emotional compliance and does not really give her the space, the time to create this agreement together. Ruminating. This one really got me. These are such understandable feelings, and I think many of us have nights like this under the best of circumstances where we kind of get caught in a thought loop and it's really difficult to get out of. And it's true that, there are strategies to get yourself out of a rut like that, right? However, it strikes me that Lily's rumination has a function. And if she were in my office, I think I would ask her to get curious about what being in this sort of rumination limbo is doing for her. My guess is that during that phone call, Lily was sort of blindsided, but also perhaps didn't feel relationally safe to ask for the brakes to be pumped perhaps more assertively, sort of thinking like, well, if I don't agree, then this could be the end of the relationship. With things feeling like such a matter of relationship life or death, the sort of internal conditions for like very genuinely opting in and consenting to something aren't really there. If I'm giving the benefit of the doubt, if I'm being generous, which is, the stance I typically try to take as a relationship therapist, this strikes me as an imperfect attempt to start to hash out the details of this relationship agreement. However, I do have some trouble giving the benefit of the doubt. I will own that. What stands out to me is the very passive language that he's using, if it has to happen, as if this is kind of an unstoppable force in some way, which of course it is not. If the two of them were in my office, I think I would pause things there and challenge him to state what he just said from the first person. It might sound something like, if I decided to have sex with someone else, would you want to know? I do wonder if it would somewhat level the playing field, because it would sort of bring in his own accountability. Holy cow, she is so good at taking us along for every bump of this emotional ride. She's feeling so disillusioned and stuck. And the line that sticks out to me is, "You won't love me, but you won't leave me." She feels stuck kind of between those things, but sort of like doomed to it. Something that I will point out, not to blame her, but noticeably absent here, is the idea that she could leave. Because at this point it feels unthinkable, right? So she feels quite trapped. And then we get to what I think is my favorite line so far, when she says, "You made me your Madonna, I wish I could be your whore." I think that line is so crucial to what's going on here. I'm really glad that she named it. What she's referring to is the very rigid binary that women frequently get pressed into by society. You know, you can either be fun and sexy, or you can be virtuous and motherly, and like never the twain shall meet, right? Obviously, people are far more complex than that and contain far more multitudes than that, and it's incredibly unfair. So at this point, Lily is noticing and reflecting that things stopped feeling fun and sexy after they got married. You know, that's the point at which she kind of felt like she got cast as the Madonna, and you know, with her being so desexualized to him, he kind of projects his sexual desires on to people outside of their relationship, which is, of course, forbidden, sexy, all that, right? I love that Lily Allen is so aware of what's going on here. I love that she's calling it out. I love that she's naming it and protesting it, really identifying how this binary undergirds the dysfunction that's brewing in her relationship. If his perception of women was flexible and nuanced and human enough to encompass Lily being Madonna and whore and all of the many other things that she is, this wouldn't be the problem that it is. Fascinatingly, I start to notice in the language that she's using as the album progresses, there are some places where it's not quite clear if she's referring to him or her children, which I think sort of reinforces this sense of being cast as the Madonna, being cast as the mother in all situations. It's clear that she resents being cast in this role, and it makes a lot of sense. Now we're at the Pussy Palace, and the line, "Am I looking at a sex addict?" really stands out. There is quite a lot of discourse and debate amongst couples therapists, sex therapists, people in the field about whether sex addiction is useful language. I won't get into every piece and angle of that debate, but one thing that people who are critical of that model frequently say is that sex addiction tends to come up in these situations where there's infidelity, with sex addiction essentially being a get out of jail free card. If I had Lily Allen in my office and she asked me, "Am I looking at a sex addict?" I would say to her, I think, "I don't know whether you are, but we do have this evidence of actions that he's taken, and it's up to you to decide if you're okay with that or not." As we progress more in the album, we start to get more details about the nature of their relationship agreement, and we learn things like just sex, no emotion. I think this is a common trap that couples fall into, and they believe that they can stem feelings of jealousy and some of like the more challenging emotional aspects that are potentially there in non-monogamy by setting that rule. And it is also quite common for couples who have made this rule to find that it does not protect them from those feelings. By the way, in relationships, whether they're monogamous or non-monogamous, there really has to be space for feelings like jealousy. jealousy is not a crime or a sin, but it's a feeling worth being curious about, especially with your partner. It seems like for their relationship, there was not really any space to have feelings like that. Another line that really, really gutted me: I tried to be your modern wife, but the child in me protests. Holy shit, what a line. On the modern life side, another stance that I will take here is that no relationship agreement is inherently more modern, progressive, or evolved than any other one. On top of the pressure, I think that Lily felt from her husband to become non-monogamous, this line makes me wonder if she also kind of held a belief that not agreeing to this arrangement would make her regressive or old-fashioned, and of course, who would want that? It's very difficult to navigate the ins and outs of these agreements under the shadow of that kind of belief. And the line, the child in me protests, tells me that she's been through some therapy. What I find so crushing about that line is that it really lays out that she's feeling in this bind where she can either maintain her relationship, keep her marriage, and be the modern wife that he wants, or she can listen to her inner self and trust her gut. How unfair. We do kind of get the sense that Lily's feelings that she's having here are being spun perhaps both by herself and her husband as resistance simply to the idea of non-monogamy, which I think really distracts from the point. She's resistant to being gaslit. She's resistant to being lied to. I think that it's kind of a bad faith, unfair spin. Okay, back to my office now. And then finally in Fruity Loop, which is the final track of the album, it strikes me that she's able to kind of extricate herself from his worldview, the idea that she is desexualized, limiting, any of those things, by noticing that this is his pattern, noticing that this is his behavior, and beginning to accept that it was not her fault that he behaved this way. And that's the album. I cried so many times. It's so good. I just want to give a few final parting thoughts about it. First of all, I would say this is a pretty unflattering portrait of non-monogamy, and I might even go so far as to say it's kind of not truly that, especially given the lack of collaborative buy-in into the relationship agreement to begin with, and also the lack of agency language that we're seeing from her husband. By the way, it's taking all of me to not say his name. I would say please don't judge non-monogamy and people who are polyamorous categorically based on this record. We have so many red flags and places where we see that his use of very passive language and also his borrowing of non-monogamous related terms is obscuring his actual intentions. I know it might seem like I'm kind of hung up on this one weird specific thing about passive language, but I think the reason for that is because of how I like to work. I like to teach and empower and help people speak authentically for and from themselves. And I wonder what would be different if we had a little more of that. I would suspect that more person-first language would have helped Lily feel less blindsided and less like she was the problem, sort of empowering her to see what was happening as, this is his decision, are you okay with that, rather than, this is a big situation, this is just the movement of the tides, and you better sink or swim. And hey, that's my video. I've never done a video like this before, so I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you'll share with me your thoughts about the album. I'd love to hear your thoughts and reflection on my reaction and my insight that I've provided. And please tell me if you'd like to see more videos like this.